Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are around the world, and welcome to this Logistics Business webinar, brought to you today in association with Cubic, a global cloud platform that delivers smart connectivity for software-defined vehicles and mobile assets. My name is Peter McLeod. I'm the editor of Logistics Business magazine. I'm your host and moderator for this webinar, which is entitled How to Stop Fleet Spend Leakage and Regain Cost Control. Now, let me set the scene very quickly. Unauthorized spend, fuel fraud, and compliance gaps silently eat away at your operating margins. As legacy fuel cards and payment tools offer only really limited real-time control or accountability, today we're going to find out how businesses are taking back control of fleet spend with the help of two industry experts. First of all, I'm delighted to introduce to you independent transport and compliance consultant Ruth Waring. Hi, Ruth, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Peter.
And we're also joined today by the product lead for Cubic's Fleet Wallet in-vehicle payment platform. He's Stuart Campbell. Hi, Stuart, and welcome to the webinar.
Hi, Peter. Great to be here.
Now, before we get going properly, just a quick thank you to all of you out there for joining us today. We really appreciate you taking time out of your busy working days. And, as much as we can, we promise it will be a worthwhile way to spend the next 45 minutes or so. So to kick things off, may I ask each of you, starting with Ruth, just to say a few words about yourselves that'll give our audience some context around your experience and knowledge.
Thank you, Peter. So I'm Ruth Waring. I'm a fellow of the Chartered Institute of Logistics and Transport, and I've been working in the logistics profession since I left university, which was in 1989. I actually opted to work in logistics, and I've loved every minute of it. I've worked in a number of different large blue chip companies and have been a self-employed transport consultant now for many years. I'm also the founder and current chair of Women in Logistics UK.
How wonderful to hear somebody who's actually chosen logistics as a career rather than fallen into it by accident, which we so often hear. Stuart, what about yourself?
Hi, Peter. Stuart Campbell, product development lead for Fleet Wallet at Cubic. So responsible for building out our in-vehicle payments platform, primarily for OEMs as a starting point. And then over the last 12 months, we've been working with HGV fleets, car share fleets, car rental fleets, and so on, but how we leverage that same technology, which can unlock cost-saving benefits, operational benefits, and so on, which we'll get into today.
Well, Stuart, there are plenty of gains to be made, I think, with fleets today. Tell me a little bit about where fleets are typically losing control as things stand.
Yeah, so in the biggest cost primarily for fleets is around fuel. So fuel would represent typically between 30 and 50% of a fleet's annual spend. The problem with how fueling is done today is essentially it's mostly via a closed loop plastic fuel card. Once those fuel cards are issued, a live instrument where control is quite low. So when that card is issued and paid for, you have no real control once it's out there as to what vehicle it's being used in, what drivers refuel it, the type of fuel that they're paying for, and so on. So the technology we've built is a fully digital solution which aims to give businesses back control and, more importantly, visibility in real time.
In your experience, Ruth, is this quite an issue with the businesses you've been working with, consulting with?
Absolutely. It really is a problem. What people don't appreciate when they see a fuel card is it's actually cash. So from the point of view of the drivers, it's very, very easy for someone to take a fuel card and essentially spend an awful lot of the company's money. And I think the problem is also that fuel is such a very, very high value commodity that it's very easy for drivers then to just see this as a way of stealing fuel. And so many fuel cards either end up as not a named person, they belong to the vehicle, or there's no registration at all on them so that they can be used by agency drivers. And unfortunately, it's a one-way street towards almost inviting people to use those fraudulently. And once you go down that road and drivers realize that other drivers are getting away with this, unfortunately, it tends to spread. And that's when you get widespread theft of fuel. And of course, it's, as Stuart said, it's such a vast part of the spend of haulage companies and anybody that operates a fleet of vehicles. Even a very small amount of fuel that's stolen is actually worth a huge amount of money. So this is a real big problem in the haulage industry and anybody that is running a large fleet of vehicles.
How is fuel stolen then? Are we talking about topping up a jerry can, or is it on a larger scale than that?
It can be people topping up jerry cans and then, or maybe 2 or 3 jerry cans, and then hiding them in the cab, going and putting them somewhere like in a lay-by, and then going and picking them up in their own car afterwards. Or it can be more sophisticated. So you occasionally hear of companies who are sharing a fuel card with their mates, and their mates then fueling up, 400 litres and in a completely different fleet of vehicles. And the problem is, as with so many of these non-real-time systems, by the time you've realised there's a problem, it's very much too late, because there's a big lag between the actual theft occurring and the company actually finding out about it.
So, Stuart, we live in a digital age. This does sound like a very offline way to run a business. What are the sort of administrative headaches that fleet managers have with traditional cards, with traditional plastic cards?
Yeah, there's 2 really. So one is around managing the cards themselves. So in terms of having to order those cards from your fuel supplier, distribute them out to the drivers, manage when cards are expiring, cards get lost, stolen, etc. So there's a whole operational complexity around just managing that. And then the second element to that is, if the card, as I said, is lost or gets stolen or expires and you haven't kept on top of that, drivers often have to pay out of pocket and then get reimbursed manually by the business. The second element is around control. So the cards themselves are not linked up, as Ruth said, to real-time spend. So generally what happens is you don't actually know what's being spent in a given day or even in a given week, generally until the end of the month. And what happens in a lot of trucking companies, particularly if they're cross Europe or cross continental, they may have 5 or 6 different fuel suppliers throughout the continent. So, you may have one that in the UK, you have a special commercial price with, a separate one in France, Italy, and so on. Generally, what happens is you get multiple different invoices in at the end of the month, and then you have to reconcile all of those maybe into one spreadsheet and hand that off to your finance teams. So the kind of operational complexity of managing this on a day-to-day and a monthly basis is extremely complex in terms of how it works today.
And I guess, Ruth, also, we're not just talking about, a Mars bar and a cup of coffee added at the checkout as well.
Exactly. Unless you have very, very strict rules around what you can and can't buy in the shop, it's very difficult to actually be really aware of what drivers are spending. And I think the other point, which is often forgotten, is that not the drivers that are driving the trucks are not necessarily a stable workforce population. As many people watching this will know, we have for many years had a driver shortage, which has meant that lots of drivers will either be at a particular employer for a short space of time, or they'll be using quite significant amount of agency drivers. And again, whilst it might seem that if you're trusting somebody with a vehicle, you're trusting them with a fuel card, actually, it's very hard then to say, right, well, you're allowed to buy AdBlue and you're allowed to buy screen wash when you go to the garage, but you're not allowed to buy a sandwich and you're not allowed to buy a Mars bar. And as we all know now, can buy goodness knows what at the garages. You can buy alcohol, you can buy a wetsuit, you can buy all sorts of things. So by the time you've found the problem, A, that agency driver may have only done 2 shifts for you, and B, it might be almost impossible to then try and get that money back through the agency, because that driver may have disappeared. Because as we know, the lag can be quite often up to 4 weeks or longer before you get the report, and therein lies the problem.
Yeah, I can see how that can be a real issue, that lag. Also, drivers buying wetsuits. Yeah, it's a endemic, isn't it, across the industry? So Stuart, what changes with the digital controls that you can bring in?
Yeah, so essentially we link up. There's three key components. So it's the payment data, the pump data, and the telematics, which are crucial. So we can see firstly, we give the fleet full control. So in a digital solution, we can show via the fleet permission stations where the driver has been authorized to refuel at. So that's one thing. Secondly, before any fueling transaction happens, in real time, we can take a read of the vehicle. So pre-fueling, what is the tank capacity? And then post-fueling, we can get the data back from the pump and the payment mechanism to see how much was spent in terms of monetary amount and how many litres were pumped. And then post-transaction, we do a vehicle reading again. So does the pump data, the spend data match up with what the vehicle is telling us? And if it doesn't, we flag it to the fleet in real time. And if it does, that's great. And we push every transaction through in real time. So rather than, as Ruth said, you have to wait 4 weeks today, you can just go in at any moment and any day and say, how much did Peter spend in X truck today in X location? Everything is real time. So much greater visibility, greater transparency, and just greater control.
So Fleet Wallet integrates with the vehicle's telematics, or should I say the overall digital infrastructure around truck fleets. Is that a relatively seamless thing to do, to achieve?
Yeah, so we've integrated with the major telematics providers out there. So essentially what we just need to do is when a fleet give us permission to talk to their vehicles, we ingest their device. They're called device IDs, vehicle IDs. And that essentially gives us instantly the make, the model, the tank capacity, the age of the vehicle, and so on. So we can see all of that data in real time. And that's what we use then to do our checks for each transaction.
Ruth, how do you see this being received from the one side by fleet managers, from the other side by the drivers themselves?
I don't think it's going to be a problem for drivers. I think there's so much now happening within the haulage, transport and logistics world, which is going digital, that this is very much a continuation of a trend that's already happening. So, for example, the people watching the podcast who have already gone from old-fashioned tacho downloads, going into the cab, downloading the tachograph once every 90 days, waiting for that information so that you can put your tachograph information to find out, for example, if there's any missing miles. If you've already transitioned to auto downloads, you'll know the massive impact that auto download has, because you can do immediate investigations into whether a driver's been driving correctly and whether they've been actually having their card in. So this is just the same as that, but for fuel. So I don't think drivers will have a problem with it, because actually it's just another continuation on a path that the profession's already going down. And as you will be aware, there's a lot now of in-cab technology. So not only things like the forward-facing cameras facing the driver, which can detect using AI. For example, if somebody's using a phone or smoking, these sort of changes are now very much widespread across this sector. Although haulage is still perceived as quite old-fashioned, in many ways, it is actually now very much catching up with the 21st century, and drivers will know that this is the kind of thing that's already going on. So I don't think drivers will have a problem with it, other than the ones who are a problem that we don't want, anyway, if they're stealing fuel. In terms of fleet managers, I think this really does deliver a real game-changing effect for managing fuel. And as I've said, I can't emphasize enough, the three big areas of spend for hauliers are drivers' wages, the cost of the vehicles, and the cost of the fuel. And as Stuart said, this can be between 30 and 50% of all the costs of the business. So if you're looking to save small amounts of money, but, all over the place, this is very much something that will make your boat go faster. It's those tiny percentage improvements. So if you can eliminate any small amounts of stolen fuel, you might think, well, we would have picked up on the big fuel theft. You probably would have done, but it would have been too late. And it's actually the small ones that add up. It's like people stealing 1p from everybody's bank account. It's the small elements of stealing that actually make the bigger problem. And just as you can improve fuel efficiency by making very small changes to the way people drive, improving driving style, this technology can make percentage differences to how much money you spend on fuel, and crucially, how much fuel you actually use in your vehicles. So it's really got that benefit. If you're looking to make small but significant changes in your overall spend control, this is an absolutely brilliant place to start.
From the perspective of the fleet manager or the person authorized to oversee the fleet, is there an added amount of admin to this, or are we proposing a solution that helps them to reduce their admin?
Yeah, this digital solution would aim to dramatically reduce admin, because one, no longer do you have to reconcile 5 or 6 different fuel suppliers alone into one report. Fleet Wallet essentially does that for you. So as I said, everything is real time, and then you can query by driver, vehicle, country, supplier, whatever it is. So it's a much faster, much quicker solution. The second element is for HGV particularly, there is services beyond fuel. So, you may have to pay for parking, for washing if you're carrying food and so on. So again, that's more suppliers, different integrations, different commercial agreements and so on. So what we've done is essentially we've gone out to the market, we've onboarded all of the key supply. So that actually gives you greater control around, I want to be able to query what was my parking cost for this month, and you can just go in and filter by that, or I want parking and fuel. So it's a one-stop shop for not only accessing all the services, but also for reporting and managing those as well.
Ruth, compliance is very much part of what you do as an independent consultant to the transport industry. Can you just sort of set the scene a little bit about, for us, the challenges around compliance? There seems to be a lot of it, doesn't there, in our industry?
Yes. I mean, we've got a number of different pieces of legislation that we are looking at. So first and foremost, we're looking at what we call operator licensing compliance. Within the UK, that would be managed by the Traffic Commissioner, and that is all vehicles over 3.5 tons, called heavy goods vehicles, HGVs. And they have various requirements. So the main ones, which people will know, will be driver's hours, working time directive, and then all of the elements around maintenance of vehicles. So we've got to think about services, service intervals, defect reporting and rectification, calibration. You've got lifting platforms. You've got to do Lola thorough examinations. And you've got to keep an eye on all of these different elements. And I think the reason why this product is so interesting is if you're doing all of that, and then you're also trying to plow through a detailed invoice for maybe, some of these fleets are hundreds of vehicles. If you've got 100 vehicles, you're trying to spot an anomaly basically by manually looking down a list of things. You've already got to think about your TACO analysis. You've got to think about your working time directive. Have your vehicles gone into service on time? Health and safety legislation, you've got all of those other concerns going on, whereas actually just something that will effectively make your life easier without having to plow through lines and lines of data looking for a needle in a haystack. I think actually that is, such a major benefit for haulage companies who have got so much administrative burden anyway, which they can't avoid because it's legal requirement. This is a real easy win for those haulage operators.
Stuart, are you still talking to businesses who are even today working in sort of predominantly paper-based methods? Are we talking about Excel spreadsheets? What's the sort of point of entry from your perspective?
Yeah, I would say a lot of the fleets we encounter are still largely using closed-loop payment cards, as we mentioned, largely having to reconcile at the end of the month across multiple different suppliers. So I think there is within the industry, there is a need and a want for a digital solution. As we touched on already, it will bring not only a lot of savings and benefits in terms of fraud reduction, cost savings, but also that operational complexity, which the solutions we've had for maybe 20 to 25 years are kind of enforcing on businesses, if you like. There is kind of broader changes happening as well within the payment space. So industry is slowly moving towards open loop cards as well, which can have additional controls for fleets. So you can set controls around specific cards can only be used in specific time windows, or you may allow a driver to, let's say, wash the vehicle once a month, whereas at the moment they could potentially do it as much as they want. So, as technology evolves, we within Cubic and Fleet Wallet, we're looking at what's happening out there and making sure that we onboard it onto our platform and we can offer it out to our customers as well.
So drilling down specifically into the sort of the compliance areas, where can you help fleet managers there with Fleet Wallet?
Yeah, it's really around control and visibility. So we've touched on it numerous times, but the big problem today, if you have a hypothesis, let's say that you are losing fuel to maybe fraud or misuse, maybe it's amongst a certain driver, cohort of drivers, or just a much broader problem. It's very, very difficult in real time or even retrospectively to go back and validate that, because essentially the payment and the telematics are not linked. They're completely disjointed. So if fleets today are using telematics technology, it might just be to see where the vehicle is parked or where it is currently. But a lot of fleets that we speak to, they're not kind of linking that up with the payment. So if a company decides to, let's say, go down a disciplinary route with a driver or cohort of drivers for, again, hypothesis of misuse or hypothesis of fuel fraud, our technology is, we would say, bulletproof in terms of fraud prevention, because we do checks around, as I mentioned, tank and payment readings. Do they match up? But we can also see, was this vehicle that was refueled or attempted to be refueled actually on the forecourt when the driver initiated that transaction? So we can give fleets just much greater control around visibility, data, transparency, which then helps them with compliance and discussions with the drivers and so on.
Ruth, are there sort of challenges around cross-border fleet operations as well when it comes to payments? Is the traditional fuel card somewhat inadequate for those kinds of operations?
Can pose problems, definitely, because if you have a fuel card which is UK based and is very much for fuel purchases in the UK, and then you travel abroad, you can end up with lots of issues around drivers literally not being able to find a petrol station that will accept that card, having to route your drivers so that they can actually refuel, which is highly inefficient. If you haven't, got them on the route that you want them, it's really annoying having to go out of your way to find a particular fuel station. So, and that's on top, obviously, of all the post-Brexit customs issues that drivers have to contend with. So I think this solution does offer, that's use a hackneyed phrase, frictionless border experience for those drivers to make it easier for them to actually fuel up, either whether it's in the Republic of Ireland or on the continent. The opportunities for those hauliers to go internationally, we don't want to make it difficult for them to do that because fueling up is difficult. So this actually is another enabler to facilitate cross-border trade.
That sounds like a decent selling point, Stuart.
Yeah, this is a kind of a question we get repeatedly around VAT reclaim, particularly. So does the solution help me around VAT reclaim? Again, if we go back to how it works today, it's, as I said, it's maybe 5 or 6 different suppliers, depending on how many countries you're operational in. But you may have multiple different geographies that you operate in. That's different VAT rates. So generally what happens is the fleets get the invoices in. Again, they're all manually reconciled in Excel. And there's 2 big problems with VAT there. One, you may be underpaying VAT and you could be hit with a penalty later, or you're not actually reclaiming enough VAT. So again, with a digital solution, we show in real time or retrospectively, you can query spend by country, and then we will automatically bake in your VAT costs or your VAT reclaim amount. So it just cuts out mistakes, cuts out that operational headache of having to manage that. And it's just a much easier, better solution for these businesses.
What does implementation look like, Stuart, from a fleet operator's perspective?
Yeah, so time-wise, it's roughly between 4 to 6 weeks to get up and running. So post-commercial agreement with Cubic. And generally then what we discuss is what type of solution do you want? So we've 3 different solutions we can offer to businesses. We can either embed directly into an existing application. So if you already have an app that your drivers primarily use, we can embed directly into that. So they click maybe a refuel button and our technology is exposed via WebView. We have a standalone fleet wallet application, which fleets can download from the Play Store or iOS store. We give them their own logins, and within there, they'll have their own vehicles, which the fleet can manage via a specific fleet dashboard. Or we have a white label product, which we kind of leverage. So some of our telematics providers, for example, may take fleet wallet technology and sell it as their own. So depending on what solution the fleet wants, then we, as I mentioned earlier, we work out who the telematics provider is, what type of payment mechanism they use. Is it closed loop, open loop? If it's closed loop, what closed loop card is it? We onboard that, we digitalize it, and then we get all of their vehicle IDs, driver IDs, and so on, which we onboard onto the system. And then we give the fleet their own instance of the dashboard, the fleet manager, and they can see the drivers, the spend, etc. within there. And then essentially they're up and running. So it's quite a quick process. Once we iron out those details, as I mentioned, it's generally 4 to 6 weeks and they're up and running with the solution.
And then actually in cab, is there any hardware required there, any infrastructure?
Yeah, so we typically will need one device. So it's either generally what the HGV drivers do is it's maybe a tablet or it can be a mobile device as well. In time, we hope to be in the HMI itself, directly via the OEMs, maybe building this into the vehicle as the vehicle is coming off the lot. But today, yeah, it's usually a tablet device or a mobile device which the driver accesses the tech from.
Ruth, the cab is a very sophisticated place. As you're saying, it's not the old backward industry that we once thought it was. It's a pretty high-tech office these guys have got now. There's a lot going on.
There is, absolutely there is. It's really surprising how far this sector has come. There's so many micro gains to be had from really small improvements. So things like being able to monitor drivers driving in real time, harsh braking, harsh cornering, MPG. All of those things now are measured, and that information is potentially available in real time, as well as, the cameras for helping if there is a road traffic collision, to understand who's to blame, who's not to blame. All of these changes really have come in the last sort of 10 years, and the sector, the profession has changed really in leaps and bounds. And I think this product is just another example really of how you can use technology for good, to really improve the experience of both the drivers, but also of the haulage companies. And it's very well known that profit margins are very, very tiny in the industry. So a product like this, which can just make a small difference potentially to your bottom line, can actually make a fairly significant percentage difference to how much profit you make. And I think those sort of things that have changed the driver's experience have actually, the driver's experience is better, but also the experience of the people back at base is better as well, because they've got so much more information. I always say to people, if you're working in a factory, you can see what people are doing. You know whether they're behaving in the way that you want them to behave. Lorry drivers, by definition, you can't. So this sort of technology, which enables you to have a view of behavior, whether that's fraudulent behavior, whether that's bad driving, or whether it's the opposite of that, means that you are in fact able to reward or simply to kind of celebrate the guys that are doing the right thing. And I think this is a good example of that, because you can't be with those drivers all the time. We don't always know what they're doing, but through this sort of technology, you can actually say, we know that these drivers are compliant and they are actually, they're working in a way that we want them to work, whether they're in front of us or whether they're, 250 miles away.
Stuart, are we talking theoretically here, or do you have examples of savings in real-world implementations?
Yeah, so we have some real-world data which we can share. Firstly, the spend alone, which Ruth mentioned earlier, for trucking companies, just giving the volume of fuel that these vehicles spend is significant. Publicly available data would tell you the average truck in the UK spends between 40 to 60,000 pounds per year on fuel. And even if you can save 1 to 2% on that by reducing fuel fraud or fuel misuse, it's quite significant. Some of our early trials with HGV companies, we've seen a 10% reduction in fuel spent, so that could be just in an early POC. We've already saved one of our customers 250,000 fuel, which otherwise would have been lost. So that's £250,000, which can be reinvested in new vehicles or vehicle maintenance, which the business otherwise wouldn't have. And then the second saving is around the operational piece. Some of these HCV companies, particularly if they're large scale ones, they may have multiple people just managing the operational complexity that this kind of ecosystem of payments today brings, rather than having a team which just manage fuel cards, distributing them out to drivers, making sure the drivers have received them, managing those manual repayments when drivers have to pay out of pocket. Digital solution removes all of that. So again, that's operational costs and operational savings which can be reinvested otherwise within the business. So yeah, our early data with kind of customers who are trialing the product is quite positive, and we'd be happy to share that with any potential new customers who'd be keen to see it.
Is there an optimal fleet size for this solution? For example, is there an upper or lower limit for it to be truly effective?
Yeah, so we built the product in a way it can scale to work with any size companies. Whether you're a fleet of 10 or, it'd be great for us, 10,000, we can work with you. So yeah, again, it's seamless. I mean, for the businesses, particularly those businesses that are large, maybe you're talking 100 plus size fleet, this technology will really unlock benefits for you, because as we've already talked about, the complexity in managing that today is significant. Whereas if you're a smaller fleet, this solution, the cost benefit might be a bit lower. So from our perspective, we will work with anybody, but it is really those larger fleets who are maybe looking for a solution like this to help them with the day-to-day running of the business.
Ruth, in your capacity as an independent consultant to the industry, you must have seen firsthand how seemingly tiny incremental savings can accumulate when multiplied across an entire operation.
Well, the sort of work that I've done really has been around improving fuel efficiency, which is obviously trying to solve the same problem from a different angle, but also delivering environmental benefits. And, even a percentage change from 8.5 miles per gallon to 8.4 miles per gallon. It's really tiny, tiny changes have a trickle through and make a really big difference to the bottom line. And, I know it's an old cliche, but it takes so much effort to generate turnover, to generate the profit. And these sort of benefits go straight onto the bottom line, or conversely come straight off the bottom line if that fuel is just disappearing out of your business. So it may seem like a really small amount of percentage change, but whether you can make those improvements, and of course I would suggest both approaches are a good idea. But if you can coach your drivers to drive in a more fuel efficient way and reduce the risk of fraud, you really are making potentially quite significant but small changes. I think it's not a contradiction in terms, because although it may be 1 or 2%, that actually across such a big fleet, and as Stuart said, it's not just big fleets, all fleets can really benefit from this. And we have this idea that if we can make 1% change here, 1% change here, actually that is what makes the difference between a haulage company surviving in these very difficult trading times, thriving, or failing completely. And I think these are the micro changes that will really make a difference to the successful haulage business.
I'm quite interested to know, how has the technology been received by fleet managers and also by drivers?
Yeah, I think in the last number of years, the technology which is required, there's multiple different elements required to kind of bring all of this together. And it's really converging now into one. Telematics now is becoming a more prevalent requirement for businesses. A lot more businesses deploying telematic solutions. We pretty much all now have mobile devices or a device within the vehicle itself, which we can run these applications on. And then payment technology as well is evolving. So, you'll see the likes of Visa, MasterCard looking at the closed loop payment ecosystem today, where they can kind of come in and maybe disrupt that with an open loop technology. And as they do, that opens up again more opportunities for businesses and technology providers like us to say, well, how do we look at this emerging technology, leverage that open loop technology potentially to give even more control? I only want, for example, Peter, to be able to fuel Monday to Friday in the UK using this fuel type. That's the type of thing. So as technology evolves, businesses will see the value of it. You'll have partners like us coming in and offering our services. And I think over time, it will just become a table stakes product where if you don't have this technology, you'll be left behind, and others will kind of see the benefits.
I think another really important point, Peter, is looking at the psychology of why employees steal from companies. And one of the really kind of obvious reasons that people steal is because companies don't do anything to prevent it. And I think that from the psychological perspective, if you have this product which actually makes it very difficult for people to steal, then they won't be tempted to even think about it. It's when companies appear to turn a blind eye or simply are not paying attention to a potential loophole like fuel theft, that then it becomes sort of endemic and people assume it's okay because so-and-so's got away with it. It becomes knowledge amongst the drivers that it's sort of okay to steal a bit of fuel from here and there. And that's when it starts to become a pandemic. And this type of technology will just stop that because it makes it really clear that it's not okay. And I think that's really a psychological change from where many businesses are at the moment. And I think that's an important point for a lot of businesses.
Stuart, in this digital age, this is of course the solution for today. But let's look ahead to tomorrow. What can Fleet Wallet promise its users that's going to come along down the line in the future?
Yeah, so we're looking at it as holistically, if you like. So when we first started building out the platform, maybe 18 months ago, and we speak to customers, particularly in the haulage industry, it's kind of walk me through this is more from the fleet perspective, fleet manager perspective, but like, what do you need? What services do you need to power your fleet? So fuel is definitely the biggest one in terms of cost and use case. But there are others, like we mentioned, parking, particularly overnight securely in Europe. If you're carrying high value goods, you want to make sure that vehicle is parked securely. That's another cost. It's another supplier agreement. Tolls is a big one, which we're looking at. Washing, maintenance, all these type of different services which these companies have to pay for. We are looking at onboarding all of that supply onto our platform. So at the touch of a button, if you just want fuel in the UK, that's fine. But then, You can enable multiple different services in France, for example, and so on. And again, all of that will be real time. So real time pricing, real time transparency on each transaction, every transaction pushed through in real time to the driver, better reporting, better data capability, and so on. So we're really looking at it from the fleet perspective. What opportunities are there to solve for, and how can we build a great solution which is best in market and best in class?
Ruth, and finally, from your perspective, is Fleet Wallet something you can see making a positive impact on the profitability of fleet operators?
To me, it does feel like it is a game changer. I think within the haulage industry, we've got a lot of smaller companies who maybe don't always get the most out of technology. And I think this is a really easy piece of technology for companies who are maybe in the middle band. There's a lot in the middle band. So maybe, sort of 10 to 50 vehicles. Yes, it will be a huge benefit to those really big fleets. But we know that there's a very big spike, and then there's a very long tail in this particular industry. And I think if you're a haulage owner looking for something that's going to make your life easier as well as saving you money, then from that perspective, this is a really easy way of ensuring that your fuel isn't walking out the door. I think that for many, many business owners is one of the things that probably does keep them awake at night, along with, all of the things around driver's hours, the traffic commissioner, the health and safety executive. But we don't want to be fueling other people's vehicles because they're taking stuff from us fraudulently. And I think many other aspects of fraud are taken very seriously, but somehow because it's fuel, because it's a little bit invisible, the transaction sort of happens somewhere else, it's harder to get a real handle on this. So for me, I think it's a great place for those middle-sized companies to think, where can I really start to make some savings here? And knowing with 100% accuracy what you're spending your money on and what you're getting in terms of bang for your buck also means that your fuel calculations and MPG figures will be more accurate as well. So you'll actually be saying, we know that driver's achieving that MPG, and we won't be muddying the waters with fraudulent fuel spend. So yes, I think it is a really good product for people to have a look at if they're looking for those small things across the business that are going to make a big difference.
I must emphasize that Ruth is actually independent from Cubic, so that's a really strong endorsement from a voice that's very respected within the industry. Stuart, you should sign her up. Only joking. So how can our audience learn more about this, and what are the first steps they should take, Stuart?
Yeah, so in terms of getting in touch, I think we'll put a QR code on the screen. So there'll be a QR code. You can scan that, and that will take you through to our essentially Fleet Wallet team within Cubic. So if you fill that out, we'll get back in touch pretty quickly. And in terms of what we're looking to do, so we're looking to essentially move from a manual closed loop plastic payment mechanism, if you like, to a real-time digital payment solution. We want to give full control back to the fleets, so we can give them within the dashboard, they can set permissions for the driver. So we only want this vehicle to be able to fuel at this brand or this forecourt in these locations. And then, as I said, we push transparency on every single transaction as it comes through. So we'll categorize transactions as blocked, so the vehicle actually wasn't on the forecourt, and we can determine how far away it was. Unusual, there's a bit of a misspend maybe going on, you need to have a look at this, or approved, everything is as it should be. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we're layering on all of the services that you'll need. So no longer will you need to go out and integrate with 5 or 6 different suppliers. You integrate with us, and then at the touch of a button, you can enable parking and washing or whatever it is that you want, or disabled services. So yeah, as I said, feel free to reach out. We're always having conversations. We're more than happy to give a deeper run through of the product if needed, and we'd be delighted to hear from you.
And just to finish things off, Stuart, what's the commercial model? Is it software as a service?
Yeah, I don't want to speak out of turn for a commercial team within Cubic, but there's different commercial agreements we can come to. That can be, either per vehicle per month. It really depends on the solution that you want. So we have a full commercial team within Cubic who will look after that. But as I said, if you get in touch, we can run through the product, and there's different commercial agreements which can be worked out. But what we've seen at the moment is it's typically a per vehicle per month price that we pay.
Well, on that note, I must reluctantly bring the webinar to a close. Thank you both to Ruth and Stuart for your engaging contributions. As much as we believe we're doing everything we can to bring down costs associated with our fleets and to eliminate waste and leakage, you've helped illustrate that there are still significant gains to be made by deploying cutting-edge digital technologies. Thank you both for sharing your knowledge and experience of the subject with our audience today. And thank you, as always, to you, the viewer, for joining us today for this latest webinar from Logistics Business and Cubic. We have a growing archive of webinars and podcasts which we'd like you to visit, all of which are accessible through our website at logisticsbusiness.com. Thank you and goodbye from me, Peter McLeod. Goodbye.